So, Stacie, the reverse engineer method is a fascinating concept. Can you explain how it empowers AEC business leaders to kind of streamline their processes and drive predictable, sustainable growth?
Running my organization for 10 years, we had something happen where we were going to lose potentially a lot of small businesses. And that gave us the opportunity to share some of what worked for us with those businesses and help make them capable of mitigating risk and much more profitable than they were before. What we learned was business owners are so often thrust into something that they were great at delivering, but not great at growing.
Did you know that the AEC industry is projected to grow by over $4.5 trillion globally by 2030, making it one of the fastest growing sectors? While this growth represents incredible opportunities, it also highlights the pressing need for sustainable practices to manage resources and minimize environmental impact. In this episode, I am thrilled to be joined by Stacie Alexiou, CEO and Managing Director of FLUX, Certified Energy Manager, and Six Sigma Master Black Belt. Stacie has managed $20 billion in scope across projects, and she's pioneered strategies like the reverse engineer method to streamline operations, drive sustainable growth, and significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And in this episode, she's going to share some actionable strategies and insights on integrating decarbonization and energy-saving strategies into AEC operations. She's also going to explore some effective strategies to foster innovation within multidisciplinary teams and really dive deep on leadership in today's climate. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC Leadership Show, previously the Engineering Career Coach. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Stacie Alexiou is the Chief Strategy Officer of Reverse Engineer Method, a digital strategy division of FLUX. Stacie, welcome to the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Anthony, thank you for having me. I am looking forward to our discussion today.
Me too, Stacie. So maybe you can start by just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and how your experiences as a merchant marine engineer, certified energy manager, and now CEO of FLUX, and of course, Chief Strategy Officer at the Reverse Engineer Method, have kind of shaped your leadership approach. You had a lot of experience there.
Sure. I couldn't be more grateful to have come from a merchant marine background, third generation, first female in that generation, or first female in the merchant marine within my family. The merchant marine is a really hands-on environment. So at a young age, you can travel the world and you can work very intimately with the things that one day you're going to wind up leading. And having that intimate knowledge of what are all of the steps that are involved builds a much more empathetic, a leader that understands what their team has to go through in order to accomplish what you're seeking to accomplish together. And I've seen much better outcomes delivered from people who have had the experiences that they are then leading.
That's great. Stacie, before we go further, for those not familiar with the merchant marines, could you maybe just explain
Sure.
the merchant marines to them?
Sure. So if you look out the window and see ocean anywhere around you and large vessels that are not military vessels, all of the merchant equipment, as well as quite a bit of military gear, gets transported by merchant marine vessels. So think of the last car that you bought, the goods that you find at the store, anything that's not locally produced is going to be shipped in some form or shape. A lot of it is on merchant vessels. So you have two tracks. You have a captain track, which we call deckies, and you have an engine track. Both of them are in the pursuit to get to their final officer level, which on the decky side is a captain, and on the engineering side would be a chief engineer. So you have several officers on each side, and they are operating the vessels that you see carrying these goods. So we don't carry weapons, although we do support the services in different transportation aspects. One example is I was on a disaster recovery mission. So during Hurricane Katrina, ships were activated by FEMA. And so those ships are government vessels that FEMA then mans with a different constituent of both civilian and service officers so that they can go and respond to these different disasters. So during Katrina, I was aboard ship for 8 months. Alongside the dock, we moved a couple different places, and we were basically facilitating the rebuild of all of the after effects of the hurricane.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I can imagine. I'm sure we'll get into it here in the next few minutes about how all these experiences that you had have really helped you in terms of building, a leadership kind of philosophy and mindset for yourself. And I want to definitely dig into some of those things. And I guess to start, sustainability and resilience is certainly a key focus of your work at Watt and Flux. How can AEC leaders effectively integrate decarbonization and energy saving strategies into their operations to drive both environment, but also still business impact?
Yeah, so tying into where we left off on the merchant marine side, as an officer operating in a vessel, you're relying heavily on communications and very precise communication. So you speak a certain way on the radio to make sure that something isn't misunderstood, or something that you didn't ask to happen happens, a different valve is actuated or a different hatch is opened, or just communication in general is broken down in the middle. In construction sites, it's so similar because you have a lot of distance between what people are accomplishing. And it's really important that communication is super clear, but also that it's layered, that people are expecting the next thing. So one of the things that I've taken from my background that has carried through both being under other people's umbrellas and operating as a leader for them, and then leading my own organizations, has been this tie-in of making sure you usher the communication. So we're not just saying, I made that call, I sent that email, I asked for it, right? It's, I'm going to usher it through, I'm going to measure it, I'm going to track it, and I'm going to be aware of where it is in each state. So we talk a lot about powering intelligently. In sustainability projects, we chose that niche because we know that people need power and they need light. Those things are not going away, right? But how we get them is becoming much more efficient. How can we get it more strategically as a business owner to our clients? That's what we refer to as powering intelligently. So we're working with time and cost. An example would be, we all purchase some form of energy, and some of us purchase it when it's more expensive, and some of us purchase it when it's less expensive. So a strategy to build around sustainability in that realm would be purchasing your electricity when it doesn't cost as much, but then having energy storage capacity so that you can store it and use it while it's at the hours that cost more. So projects like that, they save a lot of costs. They make our clients far more autonomous.
So it's like thinking about both the operations, but as well as the finance part of the business, right? Because operationally, you're going to buy this power and store it. But then from a finance perspective, you kind of bought it at a low and you're just going to use it and let it, live off of that at a lower price, if you will, as much as you can.
Exactly. And the same thing happens with lights. So a lot of our projects, our first projects, were LED lighting projects. So everyone needs lights. And we were going into these very scalable situations, not looking for smaller projects, but looking to match the size of projects that I had been on in the past. So it may not be a ship floating in the water, but if you turn it sideways, the square footage is almost the same when you go into a high rise of a building. And what do they have in tandem on every floor in a programmatic repetition? Lights. And so they're paying a certain amount for those kilowatt hours. And if we can give them the same thing, the same functional use, it's properly lighting, actually even better, healthier wavelengths, but we can do that at far less of a cost. What happens is we're pulling an annuity down from their ceiling. They're used to a benchmark, which we come in and precisely measure. So they pay this per month. Now, if we can provide them the same or better lighting, but at a much lower cost, for them, it's a big win. And both the engineering and the financial side have great benefits.
That's great. That's great. So Stacie, the reverse engineer method is a fascinating concept. Can you explain how it empowers AEC business leaders to kind of streamline their processes and drive predictable, sustainable growth?
Sure. So after 25 years in the field, we started coaching other businesses. So we had been on the side of the largest construction companies in the world, been out at sea, done a number of very complex delivery scope projects. Then running my organization for 10 years, we had something happen where we were going to lose potentially a lot of small businesses. And that gave us the opportunity to share some of what worked for us with those businesses and help make them capable of mitigating risk and much more profitable than they were before. What we learned was business owners are so often thrust into something that they were great at delivering, but not great at growing. After coaching over 1,000 of them, the amount of statistics and information that we developed allowed us then to create programs that meet what they need. So we saw that these business owners deeply wanted to succeed, but their skill, their grit, their tenacity wasn't enough. And I had been there as well too, and greatly relied on the structure from my past experiences to be able to operate my business and not fall into some of the same pitfalls that I've seen other businesses fall into. So we started by working with the businesses to connect some really important strategic aspects of why are they in business. And we started out with the end point. So where do they want to be? Where are they now? And then what can we build for them in between so that there's a bridge? And so by connecting them to their whys, we're able to get their energy back into the business where it's going to serve them the most. So we noticed that their time, the management of their time, was something that was quite difficult for business owners. They were often super busy, but not busy in the things that were actually making them very productive and profitable. So we worked with managing their time first. That led to creating gatekeepers, which led to offboarding. And after offboarding, we could dive in and say, okay, why do you own this business in the first place? You've got great skills. Somebody else would employ you and you would do very well, but you chose to be under your own umbrella. There are some perceived freedoms there. And I usually get a laugh when we say perceived freedoms because the business owner has sort of sat in their position for a bit and realized that they don't work for themselves. They work for their team and the impact that they are trying to make. And so once we connect back to their whys, every day that they come into work, they should be spending time towards things that are achieving that. And a light switch goes off. Why am I at this meeting? Why am I in this conversation? Why am I doing this task when these things are not requiring my level of skill and I could offboard them? And so that turns into creating systems for operating, starting to put some KPIs in, getting their strategic reps in, measuring, tracking executive level insights. So now we move from being an employee inside of the company to actually operating as an executive. And once they start tracking the executive level insights, they can make data-driven decisions as opposed to be pushed with different pressures of the day or the month to outcomes that they didn't set out for.
That's great. No, I love that. I mean, I think every AEC professional should be really taking stock in what they're working on and what the impact is that the tasks that they're doing are driving. And one of the things that I like to do, we use a task management system here. We have all our tasks in it. What I like to do is I look at all my recurring tasks as a great point for offboarding, because usually if it's something that you're doing like routinely over and over, they're the kind of tasks that you can kind of put a procedure in place and delegate it and train someone else to do it. So, I mean, everyone operates differently, but that's been helpful for me to try to offboard some stuff. And, really, I think looking at all of your tasks and organizing them by high impact and low impact is something I also try to do even on a weekly basis, because as a leader, you need to work on high impact initiatives. And if you get stuck on the other things, kind of like Stacie was saying, you're not gonna really drive larger growth for your organization because you're stuck in some of the other details that you should meet. It's especially harder for AEC professionals because we're technical by background. So, we spent the early parts of our careers doing calculations and working on the technical things. Now we have to get out of that and we have to kind of break those habits, which can be very tricky. So hopefully, I really like this reverse engineer method that Stacie has walked us through. And I think it could be really helpful for engineering professionals because, you can see the project completion, what it looks like. You can paint that picture and then you could see where you're at today and you could try to figure out what it's going to take to get there. And I think an important part of what Stacie said is not just figuring out what it's going to take to get there, but of all those different steps, which are the ones that you need to be driving and which is the ones maybe you can have other people working on.
Yeah, I would love to know, as you were speaking, a past experience working on a significant project came to mind where I was implementing the reverse engineer method long before starting my own company. And I wonder, in your experience, you said that you've already started offboarding different things and you keyed in on those repeat tasks. Have you experienced offboarding something and that something creating an opening space where you then grew because you had that time opened up?
Absolutely. In fact, what I try to do, Stacie, is I tell, and we do training for AEC professionals as well. And what I try to say is, if you want to delegate, which most of us are really not good at, especially engineers, I like to look at the tasks that I want to try to delegate on one side of the piece of paper. And on the other half of the piece of paper, it's like, what would I be able to do if I got rid of these? Right? Because to me, that can unlock you to say, I could be doing more sales. I could be doing more proposals. I could be calling my clients more. And sometimes that's the push that we need to get ourselves out of the technical details because by nature, we like the details.
Yeah.
But if you want to be a leader, we've got to step out of the details. So the way that I try to help people do it is to say, just imagine if you were able to work on these things instead. What would that look like for your organization, for your team, et cetera? And that kind of sometimes can get the light bulb off for people. So for me, I feel like sometimes you need to motivate yourself and your other leaders in your organization to say, well, you said you wanted to do more business development. Well, how are you going to do that? You're going to have to get rid of some other stuff. What's that? What does that look like? Type of thing. So that's how I've tried to do it.
So important of a question. Often, especially in the time of year that we're in, people are thinking about New Year's resolutions, right? And maybe by now, when the podcast is out, they are already fallen off of their New Year's resolution, right? But if we think about what are we willing to give up first, then by giving up that thing, we create the space. And if we don't create the space first, something is going to suffer.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, we just had our learning and development team meeting before this, and I told our team, it's great, enjoy the holidays with your family. It's an exciting time of the year, but from a goal perspective, from a professional perspective, I don't like to get too caught up on it's the end of the year because we operate in 90-day blocks here, right? Every 90 days, everyone in the company has goals. They work on those goals and we guide them through those goals. And then at the end of those 90 days, we see how we're doing and we reset and we start new goals. Because it's hard, like a year is too big, right? Like you can't say, hey, good, it's going to be a big year. I'm going to do this, this, and this. Because to your point, at like 3 weeks in, you're done. Like, people say I'm going to go to the gym every day and then 2 weeks in, they're done. So I think keeping shorter sprints, 90 days is really effective. Q1 is the same as Q2 is the same as Q3 is the same as Q4. And you just, keep going. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something that I think people fall into the trap of. They try to get excited about the whole year and then they get ramped up and get momentum and then it just kind of fizzles out.
We see quite a bit of that. But when they do exactly what you said, when we set up 90 days, a quarter at a time, a quarter is like a module and you can move one quarter and replace it with another if you decide to change the priorities, right? But you're approaching it in the same way. I'm going to ramp up here. I'm going to measure these things. If I want to be at this endpoint, well, I have to be halfway there at halfway of the time. So halfway through that quarter, am I tracking to it? Versus if you have the whole year, it is way too far out. People often, I think of it as something could be a year out and you could be late today. And that's more of the construction critical timeline form of thinking. You're not waiting until a week or a few months beforehand. You're thinking, am I on track for it? Very similar in shipping or any kind of transportation. Are you on track? Once you deviate from your track, you still could be thousands of miles away. You could be half of a year away. But the more you continue in that angle, you're getting further and further away from your track. So it ties so well into how do you guardrail your success. And I loved what you said about put it into quarters, because a quarter is something that you can see the start and the end. You can feel it. You can sort of touch the middle of the quarter and course correct much more effectively than if you allow a year to become less accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I had one of our team members here. She gave me a book a couple months back. It was called Chop Wood, Carry Water, How to Fall in Love with the Process of Becoming Great. And basically the whole point of the book is like, you have to show up every day and do the hard stuff, like chop wood, carry water, build good habits. So my point is day 2 of 2025 is not going to look that much different from day 300 of 2025, which is you need to show up every day, be clear on your goals, put the work in, build your craft, build your team, and then show up the next day and do it again. Right. So I constantly tell that to our team, chop wood, carry water, do your stuff every day, don't get distracted by other things, and you'll keep building good habits and good momentum. Regardless of what day it is, how big the company's gotten, we still need to do the things that are so important, and they're not always easy to do. And your goals, your quarterly goals, can keep you very focused on that. And I think that that's really important for people to think about building great habits.
Anthony, you're getting me in trouble with my bookshelf, because Barnes and Nobles and bookstores in general, Amazon, all of them are a very dangerous place for me. So thank you for adding one to the list. But to pile on there, doing your reps, you often see a client come through the door and can start out in a great revenue position, and another client can be far below them. And as they approach increasing their profitability, the one who puts the reps in, not always the best business or the best leader. It's the one who consistently, as you said, chops wood, carries water. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody who started way further off, didn't have the same things that the person who seemingly should have had the win first had. And that consistency, putting in your reps, it wins every time.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those of you that are going to go get the book, Chop Wood, Carry Water, I will say it is kind of a modern day Karate Kid, basically. Wax on, wax off, right? Like, sand the floor, paint the fence. It's the same idea. Like, doing the hard stuff every day is going to ultimately build your muscles and help you to be better. So it's a good message. All right, so let's get a little bit more into leadership. So, Stacie, you've managed projects across a $20 billion scope, coached over 1,000 business owners, and helped clients achieve significant growth, profitability, sustainability milestones like we talked about, such as reducing millions of pounds of greenhouse gas emissions and saving energy costs. What have been the biggest leadership challenges in overseeing such large-scale initiatives, and what advice would you give to leaders looking to implement impactful sustainability strategies in their own organizations?
Okay, so we start with measure, track, and it comes back to measure, track. So in sustainability projects, the first thing that we're doing is getting very comfortable with what the existing conditions are. So we're benchmarking. Where are you at right now? And then by being able to calculate where we can take you in terms of reduction in waste, energy, cost, we're able to see what the delta is. And that delta could be represented in net present value. It could be represented in kilowatt hours. It's basically how far can this project take you and what does the value have? When we come down to profitability and growth, we're doing the same thing, but we're starting at the end point. Where do we want to be this year? We want to grow 30%. Okay, are we at 10 million? What is it going to take for us to go 30% and add 3 million to that bottom line? We don't just want to look at the revenue. We want to look at how do each of these waypoints along the way build in cost, in time, in resources. So at the end, our goals for profitability are something that we just broke up in KPIs and milestones along the way, and we earned it along the way. We didn't earn it at the end of the year. We earn it every quarter, right? And we really earn it every month going into each corner. So the sustainability aspect, getting very comfortable with what are the existing conditions and then quantifying those, getting very comfortable with what's the outcome, what is going to be the improvement after we perform this work, ties into working with a company to achieve great growth and profitability. Where's their level of revenue right now, and what percentage of that revenue actually stays in the business? How profitable are they? Once we can identify how profitable they are, often a company that has a lower revenue than another company can wind up with more profitability at the end of the year, more actual dollars still in the company because of many levers that maybe the higher revenue company isn't pulling. So revenue levers such as terms, such as volume, looking at how their money is spent. Can they buy the same things, but can they do them over periods of time where their dollar is actually working much harder for them? So to tie in
Interesting.
the two, we start with a benchmark in the sustainability projects. And when we work with large companies on scaling and really increasing their profitability, we're starting with the endpoint. Where do you want to be? And then we're working our way from that endpoint to where they are now, breaking it up into small milestones and pulling those levers that can make them far more profitable in every one of those revenue dollars they bring in.
Yeah, I like that. That's really impactful. And I think to Stacie's point, and I've seen this a lot, you could have a company that did $1 million in revenue having a $150,000 profit of 15%, but then you could see a $2 million revenue company have, $150,000 or 7.5% profit, just because, like Stacie's saying, they're pulling a couple different levers, which makes a huge difference in terms of business and bottom line, which is important. And I think really what Stacie's saying too, in her answer there on a lot of different points, is very just similar to like project management. We do a lot of project management training, and the way you run great projects is you're constantly measuring and tracking the progress of your project, right? If you kick your project off on day one and you don't really pay attention that closely, and you get to the end of the project, you're going to go, oh, geez, we're over schedule and budget because we weren't tracking our project very regularly. And so it's the same thing in this regard, is track. You have to track things. And, that's something that I think a lot of professionals don't do well. And maybe the reason they don't do it well is because they're so focused on the project and they just want to keep moving forward and keep working on it. I know for engineering professionals, we kind of have the head down, let's work on our projects, let's get things done mentality. And then, like I said, you look up and you're like, oh, we overshot the schedule, we overshot the budget. And so we always like to use the analogy of a pilot, right? If you're not tracking where you're going on a flight, a couple things happen, you get off by a couple paces or whatnot, all of a sudden you're ending up in a different city than where you want it to be. So I think this whole idea of tracking your progress is really important. We have scorecards for all of our positions at EMI, and the scorecards are valuable because it's helpful for the person to say, okay, I know very clearly what my expectations are in my role and I can work towards those. And it also makes it very valuable for their manager to make sure that they're on track and have good conversations with them to say, hey, how come we didn't hit this month? What do we need to adjust? What do we need to do? If you don't have it, you're kind of operating in the dark a little bit. You're not really able to make the best decisions, and probably goes back to what Stacie said. Those are some of those levers that you're able to pull to become, much more successful.
Yeah.
So
and if I can add,
please.
if I add to what, so every organization has leaks, right? And as engineers, we're used to looking at the numbers and then looking for the delta. What was the deviation? How did it change? What happened there? And zoning in on that. But sometimes we're getting numbers back that still don't have optimal conditions, but because we got them back the last time that we looked, we accept them as normal condition. It's important to go back when you start a project and to identify the design intent. Is this project, is this operation performing to the design intent? Because while we're here, while we have this opportunity, it's a very underutilized aspect of really nurturing your relationship with your client, to go back and ask them, do you want me to just verify the design intent? What are you using this area for? How is this warehouse operating? Because often they will say, well, oh, it's always given us that number. Oh, we've always gotten that reading out of it. Well, is it working the way you want it to work? Is that department performing to achieve what you want it to achieve? So finding the leaks, not just what someone is saying that they need, but being the professional that understands and can look at what they have and really determine, is it serving them the way that they need it to?
Mm. Yeah, it's great. Having that kind of consistent communication around those important things is really critical. So, Stacie, you often talk about turning teams into engaged, high-performing assets. What strategies do you recommend for cultivating leadership and innovation within multidisciplinary teams in the AEC industry? Because we have a lot of them.
So one of the most common things that I see in AEC businesses is silo. Different organization or different divisions of the organization are often siloed, especially when you have field teams and you have office teams. And one of the divisions that most often gets siloed is the accounting division. So what happens is the field speak eludes them, and the teams who are managing out in the field are reporting back to someone who doesn't then take the information and break it up and feed it back to accounting the way that they need to. So this is a part of going back to the executive summaries and making sure that you're training your teams to be able to capture, aggregate, and feed back the data that you need as the leader, as the business owner, so that you can operate and make data-driven decisions. So often we'll see accounting is billing far later than they could. Or maybe they're not billing for things that have been completed because they didn't know that they were completed. When scope is complex and it's not broken down into schedule of values and given sort of bite-size phases that accounting can have reporting on and hear, okay, this phase is done. I can now bill for this portion of this project. It equals this amount. What happens is accounting isn't reading the drawings, doesn't understand what phases are complete. And sometimes the phases aren't broken out nice and clean. So they don't know how much they can bill. And they get this request to bill at 25%. But accounting doesn't know where 25% of the pipe is at in the field, right? So as the leader, setting up systems within your organization or working with professionals who can help you set up those systems to say, okay, this project has 10 SOVs in it. We're going to break it up into 10 different phases. There are going to be 10 different invoices, 30 days apart from each other, and have the field report to accounting when each of those phases is near complete so accounting can prepare billing and then confirm completion so that billing doesn't lag behind. That's one. The second is job costing. Please.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I was just going to say on the accounting piece is so important. When we build custom project management programs for firms, we always ask if we can interview project managers, but also accounting professionals, because there's usually a disconnect, to Stacie's point, between the two. And that causes a major problem when it comes to invoicing properly, getting invoices, getting payments collected. And that's obviously the lifeblood of your company, the cash flow. So I do think it's really important that we ensure that those that are responsible for running the projects, the leaders in the organization, have to be on the same page with the accounting and finance teams, or, it's not going to work. Something's going to break down and you're not going to have the cash flow that you need to be successful.
Exactly. And sometimes you have very well-meaning team members who just haven't gotten the priorities set for them. I recall a client of mine who was doing very well, AEC business, and he said, Stacie, I think I just made my a woman that was working with him in the accounting, I think I just made her cry again. And I said, it's not a good thing to be happening in your office. Why is that happening? And he said, because she's not doing the right things. She's not doing them in order. And we have all this exposure and she's not billing it. So we chatted, and the questions that I asked were, have you prioritized to her which of these things need to be done first? And the answer was no. Does she have any form of structure in what you need and what the company needs to operate? Does she know that this stack of papers versus this stack of papers is going to keep your doors open and the lights on? And the answer, of course, was no. So in a very positive turnout of the conversation, I suggested that he create a system for her with priorities and put a board up so she could be recognized. And immediately things started getting billed properly, the funds started coming in and all of the payables were completely diminished because she didn't know which way to go. And that's on us as the leaders and the business owners to be able to set those systems up or hire someone to set those systems up so that people can do the job that we hired them to. We so often hire great people and then forget to let them be great.
Yeah, and I think one really important point that comes out of that is remembering that everyone's different. And as a leader, you're going to need to recognize the different skill sets and work styles and communication preferences of every person that you deal with to be able to do what Stacie just talked about in terms of, like, in that specific example, that leader had to recognize this woman's strengths and how to work with her to make sure that you could get the most out of that person, because everybody is a little bit different. And I think you need to spend some time in the beginning of a project, understanding the different stakeholders and their communication styles and work preferences. And then as a leader, you got to get to know your team members so you can kind of put the right people in the right seats, which I think is very important. Stacie, I want to talk a little bit about automation. Talk a little bit to us about how streamlined processes, automation, how they can contribute to success and efficiency of AEC projects, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there in our industry.
Yeah. So there's a saying, you don't earn in the field, you earn in the office. And as you brought up earlier, you took a look at the repeat tasks that you had and how those things could be offboarded. Another step to that is also how those things can be automated so that you don't become the bottleneck yourself. So often a leader might be emotionally attached to some process that they have to do themselves. And when they're able to see it as long as they stay attached to that thing and reinventing the wheel of that invoice or that proposal or that presentation themselves, they're costing the company growth and they're costing the team the potential of stability work and a stable work environment. There's so much within our systems, within AEC companies that can be automated, templatized, digitized. And in addition, there's a lot of knowledge that business owners and leaders have in their mind that is sought after, that can be turned into digital assets that people have not yet. So you do a lot of training and know very well the power of having digital assets. There are plenty of businesses out there that have very limited growth revenue streams because they are not automating. They are spending volumes of time on something that could be systematized for them so that they can be focusing on growing the business and doing the things that they are great at. And in particular, the less growth revenue streams we have, the more reliant we are on each one. So automations and systems allow us to have predictable growth, and predictable growth allows us then to really hone in on pulling those strategic levers so that we can increase profitability.
Yeah, that's great. And I think they can also, in terms of AEC projects, make sure that you maintain consistent quality across your projects if you could build really good, systems in. All right, Stacie, last question I have for you. What final piece of advice can you give to AEC leaders that are looking to inspire their teams and really drive meaningful long-term impact in the industry? I think we're always thinking as leaders, how can we be impactful? And what advice would you have around that?
Yeah, hung on your last question with one more thing, if I may.
Sure.
User
Please.
experience. So if we don't automate and if we don't, and we're not talking about having robots talk to your clients, we're talking about processes that can be streamlined, right? If we don't automate, your client's going to have a slightly different experience every time. And every time you lose a great person in the company and maybe they move on, or people end a certain chapter and you have shifts within your company, you're going to have a different user experience. So automating allows the company's culture to be maintained throughout all of those shifts, and you can really optimize all the great people that are a part of your organization and have every client that comes to you feel like they have that same incredible experience. Now I will do the assignment and answer your next question.
Yeah, just talking about, I want you just to talk about driving impact as an AEC leader.
Okay. So I thought about this question beforehand and narrowing down which item I would step off on and really want to highlight was tough. So if I may, I'm gonna focus on one thing and then break it down into 5 sub areas. The highlight that I would make is always define what success means to your client upfront and early, and revisit that at different waypoints to make sure that their idea of what the successful delivery is not different than yours. Communicate that, document it. The most common failures or frustrations on the client side is typically when they think something different was going to happen. And what I've seen where leaders will come to us with an issue and they have failed at something, the failure is never really claimed as a failure by the client if it's handled really well, if it's communicated, if expectations were set, right? So defining success and allowing your client to define that versus forcing our own opinion of what we think a successful outcome is.
Yeah. That's I just want to mention here that what I've read about what you just described, I've seen it described as an expectations gap, right? So if your client expects one thing and you deliver something other than that, there's a gap there. And that gap causes, frustration, anger. If my wife expects me to be home at 5 and I get home at 6, that's an expectations gap. And there's going to be anger and what's going on. So to your point, holding a really good kickoff meeting at the beginning of a project to get the expectations of all your stakeholders on the table so everyone knows what's expected so you can try to deliver those is really important, because if you have that gap, it's going to just create anger, someone being upset, not satisfied, which is the opposite of what you're going for with your client. So I think that that's a really key thing, those expectations.
Yeah, and great example on your side, because we imagine all the other things that could come into it. Someone could be fearful. Well, clients can be fearful too, just like family members. The client might fear that they could default in something if the funds aren't, if rent isn't able to be collected because completion and interiors can't start at a certain time. The next one that I would tie into that is developing a strong ecosystem. So often opportunities can come to you as a business owner, and people aren't always black and white. They will hire us or they won't hire us. Right? There are people within our ecosystem, and often an opportunity can come to us as opposed to allowing that opportunity to pass and just declining it. Think about who's in your ecosystem that potentially could benefit from it. So if goodwill comes your way, don't let it be wasted. Instead, hand it to someone who is in the ecosystem that could potentially take that job, and building that really strong environment around you as a leader. A decade passes and second decade passes, and wow, you have built a family of people that you really would perform for each other in any type of business case. So that's a really rewarding part of building an ecosystem.
Yeah, no, it is rewarding. And I think all of these items that you touched on today are really important in the climate that we live in today, in terms of not just leading and driving effective projects, but driving sustainable, impactful, and profitable projects. I think the stuff that we talked about today can really help you with all 3 of those, which should be, in my opinion, goals of every company, to drive that sustainability, also while remaining profitable, right? And impactful. And I think we've hit all those. So Stacie Alexiou, I want to thank you for being on once again. Stacie is the Chief Strategic Officer of Reverse Engineer Method, a digital strategic division of Watt and FLUX, and we're so happy to have her. She's got a ton of leadership experience, and she shared a lot of us with us here today. Stacie, thanks so much for spending some time with us here today on the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure to chat with you today, Anthony. And it's a good thing that We have a series of questions because this conversation could absolutely go on much longer, and engineers are not always lauded for our social skills. So it's great to be able to chat with other AEC leaders about things that really resonate for us.
Awesome. Stacie, thanks. I hope to have you back again in the future.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anthony. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Stacie. Awesome stuff. Really deep into leadership, sustainability, and just really measuring your progress so you can be successful. Stacie, thanks for the episode. Please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.